Mrs. Marianne is not named in the will. Vivian said it so calmly, so evenly, it almost didn't register as cruelty until the silence in the room made it deafening. I sat frozen in place, in a room where the rustle of legal paper felt louder than my own heartbeat. No one looked at me, no one objected. Not even Julian, my son, the only one who could have spoken on my behalf. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you are watching from. I wasn't angry about the money. I was angry because, after 47 years of living together, I was still treated like a stranger. The meeting carried on like a cold broadcast, just documents, signatures, and carefully chosen legal terms. I wore a simple black dress and a pale gray cardigan, the only thing I had kept from Charles's funeral 3 weeks ago. Across the long table were folders, pens, unreadable faces. The man leading the meeting was a young lawyer, sharp suit, neutral tone, soulless eyes. I didn't remember his name, only the thin-rimmed glasses and that voice, dry, mechanical, like a printer. Julian sat to my left. He looked thinner than I remembered. His gaze avoided mine. To my right was Vivian, my daughter-in-law, sitting with the posture of someone who had already won. She spoke again, with the same quiet finality. Mrs. Marianne has no share in Mr. Charles Beckett's estate. The division will proceed according to the updated, notarized will. Still, no one spoke. No one questioned. Not the lawyer, not Julian, not a single person in that sterile room. Only me. The woman who had walked beside Charles through every collapse, counted every pill as his memory dimmed, and held his hand through 3 strokes. The woman who stood with him for 47 years through poverty and struggle, from our cramped rental apartment in our youth to the quiet elegance of the white estate we once called home. Now, I was seated at the edge of all of it like someone who had never belonged. I clenched the worn leather strap of my old bag, not because of its worth, but because inside it was a letter I had written to Julian after the funeral. I had planned to give it to him. Now, there was no point. The lawyer continued, unshaken. The management rights of the Beckett Foundation shall be entrusted to Mrs. Vivian Beckett, the sole legal financial representative on file. Vivian nodded without emotion. She never once looked at me. I drew a deep breath. I didn't want to cry, not here, not in front of these people, not when the pain had already hardened into something beyond tears. Julian kept his eyes down, tapping gently on the table, a gesture Charles used to make when he was deep in thought. I watched my son, praying for a flicker of defiance, a glance of loyalty. But what I saw was resignation, or worse, complicity. I wasn't angry about the money. I'd lived through the years of instant noodles and torn mattresses, slept beside Charles while he built a future from scratch. Even after we had wealth, I still shopped at flea markets, still drove an old sedan because I always believed a car is meant to take you somewhere, not to impress anyone. Money was never the goal, but to be erased from a legacy not of wealth but of memory was something I couldn't bear. Who was I to them now? A woman who once lived with Charles, or simply a name crossed out, as if I never existed at all? The lawyer closed his folder with finality. If there are no further questions, I hereby declare this meeting adjourned. Chairs scraped the floor. Hands were shaken. Someone congratulated Vivian. "You handled that very efficiently," one voice said. I remained seated. Vivian approached me with a polite smile, a bare minimum of decency, devoid of guilt or doubt. Only victory. "Thank you for coming," she said lightly, as if I had attended some social function. "Charles always admired your composure." I looked at her and gave a small nod. I had no words left to offer. After everyone left, I stayed behind. I took a photo of Charles from my wallet. He was smiling in it, lips gently pressed together, eyes squinting with quiet joy. That smile, only I truly understood it. "You once told me, if I go first, keep the house. It's where everything began." I whispered, "But now, Charles, they've erased me from your life." A bitter smile crept across my face, soundless and sharp. Outside, rain had started to fall. I had no umbrella. No one asked if I needed a ride. No one even looked back. I called a taxi. In the back seat, I stared out at the passing city, cold, unfamiliar, hurried. My hands trembled as I pulled an old document from my bag, Charles's treatment records. From start to finish, it was my name on every form. I was the one who signed for every surgery, who sat through every hour in ICU, who wiped his tears when he cried out my name in confusion. And yet, all of it was erased with a single sentence. No portion of Mr. Charles Beckett's estate shall be allocated to Mrs. Marianne. I turned toward the seatback and whispered, not knowing if I was speaking to myself or to him. I don't need the inheritance. I just want to be acknowledged that I was there, that I was your wife, the only one who truly knew who you were. And so the story begins. Not from rage, but from a silence that could no longer be endured. They held Charles Beckett's funeral at St. Albans Cathedral, the same grand cathedral that once celebrated his promotion, and yet, a place where I had never truly felt I belonged. Vivian organized the ceremony like a perfectly scripted media campaign. Everything was flawless. The gold-embossed name cards, the white orchids flown in overnight from the Netherlands, and even the custom-designed sympathy board, complete with a hashtag that read, #Remembering Charles, the man who built an empire and inspired the next generation. I arrived early, but no one greeted me. I quietly made my way to a pew in the back, where muted violet sunlight spilled through stained glass. No one turned to acknowledge me. No one said my name amidst the crowd of well-dressed strangers in designer suits and dark sunglasses. I looked around, hoping to find one familiar face in the sea of polished guests. But there were no old friends of Charles, none of the men who used to sit with him for hours discussing philosophy and football. Instead, I saw investment partners, financial journalists, fund managers, and a handful of television personalities. I overheard someone whisper nearby, "Vivian is truly composed, losing a husband and still carrying herself like that." Another chimed in, "Not even 40 and already managing that kind of fortune. Impressive." I tightened my grip around an old wedding photo in my hand, a grainy film image, slightly out of focus, but Charles's eyes in it were crystal clear. I thought to myself, I used to be an irreplaceable part of his life. Used to be. There was no speech for me, no reserved seat, no mention of my name anywhere in the program. The service began. The officiant, a young, polished pastor, delivered his condolences as though giving a keynote address. Then Vivian walked to the podium, her hair neatly tied, wearing an elegant black dress that struck a balance between mourning and presentation. She offered a soft smile, the kind one might give after closing a deal. Charles Beckett was not only a businessman, she said. He was a visionary, someone who saw opportunity where others saw risk. He entrusted me not only with his heart, but with the future of this family. The room applauded. They applauded at a funeral. I could hardly believe what I was witnessing. Julian, my son, and Charles's only child, gave no speech. There were no stories from his childhood, no mention of the long nights when Charles and I built our company from scratch, starting with nothing but a kettle, a dream, and our tiny kitchen table. There was only Vivian, standing at the center, as though she alone had the right to represent the past, the present, and the future. I remembered Charles's father's funeral. It had been modest, intimate, filled with memory. That day, Charles had held me close and whispered, "If I go first, you must lead my service. I want them to know who I really was, and that you were the reason I became that man." But now, all of that felt erased, as if it had never happened. When the service ended, no one said my name. I stepped outside as the crowd dispersed. Vivian stood surrounded by reporters. One of them asked, "Ms. Vivian, how do you see Mr. Beckett's legacy continuing from here?" She smiled, her eyes fixed on the camera, not on the people. "I just want to continue what he started." No one looked for me. No one asked if I was all right. No one even mentioned that Charles had a first wife. No, a true wife who had stood beside him for nearly 5 decades. I returned the same way I had come, alone, in an old taxi. During the ride, I opened my purse and pulled out a small business card from the pastor. On the back, scribbled in hurried handwriting, it read, "Mrs. Marianne, contact me if you'd like to speak." Below that, just one more line. Unfortunately, the program was changed. That night, I cooked beef stew, Charles's favorite. I set 2 bowls on the table, out of habit more than hope, but the chair across from me remained empty. The old radio played "Fly Me to the Moon," the 1964 version. I put down my chopsticks. I wasn't hungry. There was no one left to share the meal. 2 days later, a package arrived. No note, no message, just a small, polished ebony box lined with black velvet. Inside was a single silver tie clip engraved with 3 letters on the back, CBM. No photo, no scent of the cologne he used to wear, no trace of memory, just an object cold, weighty, and silent. I held it to the light, and the silver glinted through eyes blurred with tears. Charles never forgot details, I thought. If he left nothing, it's because he didn't have the chance, or someone didn't give him the time. I opened the old desk drawer where he used to keep his papers. Between yellowed receipts and a coffee-stained notepad, I found an ivory envelope unstamped. On the front, in familiar slanted handwriting, it read, "In case anything happens before I update." My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was a handwritten draft of a will, unofficial, unnotarized, but in the same script I had read for decades, even in my dreams. The first line said, "To Mari, the only one who stood beside me through every storm." The list that followed filled nearly a page. At the top, Marianne Beckett, 70% original ownership, a smaller portion to Julian, and finally, Vivian, if still part of the family, may be considered as financial support, nothing more. I laid the page down and placed a hand on my chest. It wasn't about the money. It was about hearing his voice, one last time through every line. "I never meant to leave you behind. I just didn't get the chance to sign." In that moment, I understood it doesn't end with the funeral. It cannot end this way, not with a man like Charles, not with a woman like me. Julian came by on a Thursday afternoon, no call, no warning. I was steeping tea when the doorbell rang, and I paused for a moment, recognizing his figure behind the frosted glass. He wore a light brown coat, his hands still buried in his pockets, just like when he was a boy waiting outside school for Charles to pick him up. We looked at each other for a long, quiet second. I gave a slight nod and opened the door. He didn't say much, just stepped into the living room and sat down in Charles's old armchair by the window, the one where he used to read the morning paper. I placed a cup of tea in front of him and sat across, unsure if he had come to offer an apology, ask a question, or deliver more silence. After a pause, he pulled a small brown notebook from his coat pocket and laid it gently on the coffee table. "I found this in Dad's desk drawer," he said. "Not in the safe, just tucked in with some old books." I didn't reach for it right away. My hands rested quietly in my lap, fingers intertwined to steady the tremble. Julian didn't meet my gaze. His eyes stayed fixed on the cup before him, as if looking at me might make something inside him break. I figured, if anyone should have it, it's you. That was all he said. Then he stood. No promise to return, no parting hug. But when the door closed behind him, I felt something shift, not because I felt joy, but because an old ache inside me had finally been seen. I sat in silence for a long while before I reached for the notebook. The cover was worn, the edges soft, the corners slightly frayed. I opened to the first page. There were only 3 lines. Day 10 after the second round of treatment. Mari still made soup even though she's tired too. I'm afraid one day I won't remember the taste. It wasn't just ink on a page. It was Charles. Not his voice exactly, but his rhythm. His gentle way of noticing the quiet things most people overlook. I turned the pages slowly. There were no secrets hidden between the lines, no legal statements, no revelations, just scribbled fragments of daily life. notes about his medication, reminders to water the garden, a list of friends he hadn't called in a while, and a simple instruction: buy chamomile tea for Mari. On one page, I found a scribble that said, send anniversary card to Elliot Nora. There was even a drawing of a chair he wanted to build. To anyone else, it was an ordinary notebook filled with forgettable scraps. But to me, it weighed more than all the files and ledgers that had surrounded his estate. Because inside these pages, I existed. I was remembered not as a line in a will, but as someone whose presence was woven into the ordinary. That night, I didn't sleep. I placed the notebook on my dressing table beside the old letters Charles had written me when we were young, the notes reminding me to take my vitamins, the list of movies we'd promised to watch. I remembered one message so clearly. He had once written, I might forget the names of stars, but never the day you said yes. So why hadn't he left me anything, not a letter, not a note, not even a line? Doubt has a way of creeping in quietly. It doesn't shout. It just tightens its grip slowly until the silence feels louder than any answer could. It wasn't about money. It was about being erased. It was about the unbearable thought that I might have been invisible in the very story I helped build. He wouldn't have left me like that, I whispered into the stillness of the room. Not Charles. Not the man I knew. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the dusty kitchen window. I walked downstairs. The notebook was still there, unmoved. And suddenly, I remembered something small, but unsettling. The day Charles passed, Vivian had insisted that all documents be turned over to her, the so-called legal representative of the family. I hadn't been allowed into his study. I hadn't been given access to the safe. Everything happened so quickly, too quickly. But the man I married, the man who once wrote, I won't sign anything without asking Mari first, he would never have left me behind without a word. I walked to his study, the room Vivian had locked after the funeral. But she hadn't changed the locks. I still had the old key. The door creaked open into the quiet, sunlit dust. Everything was just as he'd left it. I ran my fingers across his desk, the fountain pen he loved, the old wedding photo we never got around to reframing. And then my eyes landed on the drawer. Most people didn't know Charles was left-handed, which meant everything important was always kept to his left. I opened the right drawer, empty, then the left, locked. I reached for the spare key hidden, as always, inside the thickest book on the shelf, a habit he never gave up. The lock clicked open with a soft sound. Inside was no jewelry, no financial statements, no notarized papers, just a single folded piece of paper in his handwriting and a short list. 1. Westwood House. 2. Company shares. 3. Fund for Mari. I stared at it, barely breathing. It wasn't notarized, it wasn't signed, but it was him, his voice, his phrasing, his heart. It was the same way he used to talk to me late at night in our armchairs, murmuring truths he never shared in public. At the bottom of the page I read, to Mari, the only one who weathered every storm with me. If I didn't get the chance to fix this, please know I never meant to leave you behind. My fingers trembled as I held the note. I felt grief, yes. I felt anger, but also relief. Because now, I knew the silence hadn't come from him. He hadn't chosen to forget me. Someone else had chosen for him. And that was enough to awaken something in me that had been sleeping far too long. If you're still here, still reading, maybe you've waited too for a sign, for a word, for someone to remember you were part of their story. Let me tell you this, you are not a footnote, you are not something that can be edited out, and you are not alone. This is where my silence ends, not for revenge, not for inheritance, but for something far more precious, the truth. I opened the oven. The scent of cinnamon lifted gently into the air, warm butter melting, red apples softening beneath a thin layer of dough. I was baking Charles's favorite apple pie, the one he always asked for whenever the weather turned chilly, whenever we needed a small excuse to pull close to each other in that warm little kitchen. But tonight, I wasn't baking for anyone else. I was baking for myself, for a memory, for a feeling that needed to live again. Outside the window, the rain tapped quietly on the eaves. Late autumn rain, the kind that doesn't rush or roar, just lingers like a background song to nostalgia. The kitchen was still the same, the faded yellow paint on the walls, the salt jar always kept by the gas stove, the checkered hand towel we bought at the farmer's market years ago still hanging by the hook on the door. And suddenly I heard footsteps behind me. "You forgot the parchment paper again, didn't you?" Charles was there, just as he had always been. Wearing his favorite charcoal sweater, his salt and pepper hair a little tousled, those familiar eyes sparkling with a look that was equal parts amusement and gratitude. I didn't turn around. I didn't need to. In my heart, that moment lived just as vividly. "I'm trying to do it the way you liked best," I smiled, setting the pan on the tray. "The way I liked best was having you in this kitchen." He stepped closer, his hand resting gently on my shoulder. "The pie was just an excuse." "You and your old flirting tricks," I teased. "Old but effective," he chuckled, "especially on rainy nights like this one." The smell of pie filled the room, blending with old memories. We sat on the long wooden bench we'd shared for years over hundreds of cups of tea and thousands of stories, from the future of the company to the dripping sink that never stayed fixed. Charles took my hand. He looked into my eyes and said, his voice low and steady, a tone I can still hear even now, "Mari, if one day I'm no longer here and someone tries to erase you from everything, know that I will still be behind you from the other side." I froze and looked at him. "What are you saying?" "It's not a prediction," he replied, still calm, still loving. "I just know. There may be people who won't understand how much you meant to me. They'll look at ledgers, at titles, at the assets, and forget that the reason I stood tall was never the balance sheet. It was you." I said nothing. I just held his hand tighter. "I don't know who will be beside you then," he continued, "but I want you to remember there was once a man who chose you, and would choose you again in every lifetime." The kitchen fell into a sweet silence. Rain still fell outside. The crust was turning golden at the edges, fragrant and warm. And in that still moment, I knew I had been truly loved. Not the kind of fleeting love wrapped in roses and sweet nothings, but the lasting kind, the kind that weathered storms, that sat quietly when no one applauded, that looked ahead without needing a spotlight. The memory ended like a dream, interrupted by the chime of the front door. I wiped my hands on my apron and stepped out. No one was there. Just a strong gust of wind that knocked the wind chimes together, the ones Charles bought on our trip to Kyoto, because he said they sounded like time reminding us it's still passing. I returned to the kitchen and pulled the pie from the oven. It seemed to breathe, and with it, a promise came alive in the scent filling the room. "I won't let anyone erase you from this legacy, Mari." I sliced a small piece and placed it on Charles's favorite blue porcelain plate. I didn't eat it. I just sat with it, quietly. Then I walked into his study, the same one where I'd found his handwritten note just yesterday. I sat at the desk, took out paper and pen, and began to write everything I remembered, every word, every glance, every vow he made. Not to keep to myself, but as proof that I didn't imagine the love, that I had been chosen. And now it was time to reclaim that place, not through anger, but through the quiet resolve of a love that had truly existed. If you've ever had someone whisper to you, "I believe you'll be strong even when I'm gone," hold on to those words like a lantern in the dark. Because the truth can be hidden, and love may be buried, but what was once real cannot be erased. And if you believe that some things are worth proving not through cold revenge, but through resurrected memory, share this story. Not just for yourself, but for those who have been denied, yet never stopped believing in what's right. Marianne is entering her next chapter. And there's no turning back now. The bedroom still held a faint trace of Charles's sandalwood cologne. I sat alone as the early winter breeze slipped through the window's edge. The house felt unfamiliar, not because of the absence of the man I had loved, but because of the erasure of my name from everything we had built together. My name was not on the gravestone. No one mentioned me at the funeral. No sincere condolences were offered, and there wasn't a single line for me in the official will. Still, something didn't sit right. After nearly 50 years of marriage, I knew Charles. He could be stubborn, slow to act, and sometimes too trusting, but he never left important things unsaid. He was not the kind of man to abandon me without a word. Never. That night, I couldn't sleep. I rose quietly, turned on the dim yellow lamp, and walked to his oak writing desk, the place where he kept his scattered notes, project outlines, to-do lists, and those scribbled affirmations on cream-colored sticky pads. The third drawer from the bottom always jammed. You had to angle it just right to open it. I remembered that because I was the one who fixed it years ago, after his endless complaints. I tilted my hand slightly, gave a sharp tug, and the drawer popped open with a hollow thud. Inside, a few worn leather notebooks, the Mont Blanc pen I gave him for his 60th birthday, and one ivory envelope unsealed, folded in half, clipped with a small silver paperclip. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was a single A4 sheet, folded once. His handwriting slanted gently, the strokes familiar and strong, though a little uneven with age. For M, the one who walked with me through every storm. If I don't get the chance to amend this, please know, I never intended to leave you behind. I simply trusted the wrong people. I believed they would help me finalize everything. If they didn't, remember this. I never removed your name, not from the paperwork, and certainly not from my heart. I let out a quiet gasp. M. He had never written out my full name in his letters. To him, I was always M. Simple, neat, meaningful. Below the message was an informal list, far from a legal structure, but unmistakably a record of intent. Aspen House, to M. 18% of Beckett Holdings, to M, unless she declines to receive. The Montana Ranch, for the first family member who values nature over profit. If none, leave it untouched. Savings and personal account, Ms. share to be used for her dream, opening a bookstore. At the very bottom, just one more line. I know this draft is incomplete, but if things don't go as planned, use this as the last trace to find the truth. I'm sorry I didn't finish it. No signature, no witness, no stamp, just love revived in every line of ink. I pressed the paper to my chest. I didn't cry, I didn't scream, I didn't curse anyone, but inside me, something shook, an earthquake of confirmation. He hadn't forgotten me. He hadn't pushed me aside. He simply hadn't been fast enough to stop those who wanted me gone. And I knew then it was no longer just grief. It was time to reclaim my voice. The next morning, I brought the letter to Nathan Charles's nephew, the only one who had checked in on me after the funeral. A freelance journalist with a background in financial investigations and family estate dynamics, Nathan understood the weight of an unsigned note and the hidden power plays behind every perfect will. He read the letter in silence. When he finished, he folded it carefully and said, "Grandma, this isn't a legal document, but it is a clear intention. If we can prove he was blocked from finalizing it or trusted the wrong person, this could be strong enough to reopen the case." I sighed, and that will bring conflict, trouble, maybe even rejection from everyone left. Nathan placed a hand on my shoulder. "You only need one person to believe you have the right to speak." I believe that. Charles did too. If you're still here reading this, maybe you've also experienced being overlooked. Maybe you've sat at meetings, ceremonies, family gatherings, realizing you were a ghost in the memories of others. No one saved you a seat. No one said your name out loud. No one called you home. But don't let that convince you it was ever the truth. Sometimes, it's just one signature gone missing. Sometimes, someone else got trusted instead. And sometimes, all you need is to find the handwritten letter of love, the kind no one can erase. If you've been searching for a sign that you're not invisible, this is it. If you've been removed from someone's narrative because you didn't fit their mold, remember, documents can be rewritten, but love never fades. That night, I slipped the letter into a clear plastic sleeve, zipped it shut, and sent a copy to a lawyer Nathan recommended, Lydia Cohen, a specialist in contested wills and what she calls interrupted legacies. A woman who herself was ousted from a company she helped build just because she didn't hold a formal ownership stake. After reading the letter, Lydia said just one thing. "This may not be what courts prefer, but it's exactly the kind of thing that makes trustees stop and listen." I nodded. I didn't need everything. I only needed my name to be returned to the list he wrote with his heart. And I was willing to go as far as I had to, not to win, but to protect a truth quietly suffocating beneath silence. You don't live beside a man for 47 years without knowing who might hold the missing pieces when something doesn't feel right. For me, that person was Victor Langston Charles's only true confidant outside our family. A lawyer by trade and by instinct, Victor had been the legal cornerstone of the Harper Group for over 20 years before his quiet retirement. He had stood beside us on our wedding day and defended me when the Harper name was still something I had to earn, not share. And if Charles had left something incomplete, I knew Victor would know. We met at a small cafe in the Highlands, the kind of place with worn teacups and soft jazz playing in the background. It hadn't changed, and neither had Victor's routine. He still sat by the window, reading the morning paper with the same deliberate calm. He'd aged, his hair was silver now, his back a little hunched, but the sharpness in his eyes was untouched. When I sat down, I didn't dance around the reason I came. "Victor," I said quietly, "I'm here because of a draft." He looked up, unsurprised, and gave a slow, steady nod. "Charles always told me, if something happens, she'll know what to do." We talked for nearly 2 hours. I showed him the handwritten will. He took it gently, and his hands trembled slightly. "This is Charles," he said, his voice lower now. Every loop, every tilt of the pen, I even see how he always spelled assets wrong. He's been doing that since law school. I asked if Charles had ever mentioned wanting to update the will, and Victor nodded again. Many times. After his heart surgery, he was convinced he wouldn't have much time. He drafted several versions, but he didn't trust Vivian, and he avoided Harper Legal altogether. She had her hands in too much already. When I asked if he believed someone had stopped Charles from finalizing his intentions, Victor didn't hesitate. "I don't suspect," he said. "I know." That evening, instead of going home, I walked straight into Lydia Cohen's office, the attorney Nathan had brought into our lives. She was calm and perceptive, someone who listened with her whole self. She placed the documents in a neat row, reviewing them slowly. "We have intent," she said. "We have a draft. We even have a witness to confirm he planned to update, but it's not enough yet." I asked her what else we needed. She replied, "A fault line, a misstep in the official will, something we can build a case on." That crack, unexpected and uninvited, came from someone nobody noticed. It was late in the afternoon when a young woman walked into Lydia's office just as she was preparing to leave. She looked nervous, her light hair pulled back, her hands tucked tightly in her coat pockets. She introduced herself as Ava Jensen, Vivian's assistant for the past 3 years. "I can't keep quiet anymore," she said, her voice shaking. "I have a copy of something I was asked to sign, pretending to be Mr. Harper." Lydia's expression darkened. "You mean as a proxy?" "No," Ava replied. "I mean forged, on the official will." The room went still. Ava explained it had happened on a Sunday, just a couple of months before Charles passed. Vivian had called her into the office, placed a document on the desk. It looked like an asset summary and said, "Charles's signature looks too shaky, not clean enough. Sign for him, he's already approved it." Ava had hesitated, but Vivian had reassured her, said it was only a copy, that the final version would be signed later. "I believed her," Ava said. "She always seemed so polished, so powerful, and she knew exactly how to scare people into silence." A week later, the document was certified. The signature listed as Charles Harper's was Ava's. She hadn't come empty-handed. She brought with her a printed email chain, an internal message containing both the unsigned draft and the signed version, and, most damning of all, a handwritten note from Vivian to the finance department. "Proceed with the first disbursement from the estate. No need to check with Charles. I've already handled it through legal." That phrase, "I've handled it," would become our key. Lydia placed her hand gently on mine and said softly, "We have it now. All of it." I sat still, not because I was surprised, but because the truth, no matter how deeply buried, always finds its way through the smallest of cracks. I didn't need an army. I just needed enough light to pierce the curtain that had hung too long. Victor, Lydia, Ava, none of them perfect, but each of them honest. And they stood with me not because of what I had, but because of what was right. Maybe you've been silenced before. Maybe someone once told you to, "Just sign this, it doesn't matter." Maybe you stayed quiet because you thought your voice wasn't loud enough to change anything. Ava is you. She is all of us who've ever felt small in the face of power, but stood anyway because the lie was heavier than the risk. If you hold even a piece of truth, know this. Light doesn't need to be loud. It only needs one person willing to lift the lid. The next morning, Lydia submitted a motion to the Harper Foundation's board, Vivian's current seat of influence. Attached to the documents was a note that read, "Requesting immediate suspension of the executive director, evidence of falsified legal documents and intentional removal of a rightful heir." I didn't need applause. I only needed the process to begin. A quiet return of my name, placed where it had always belonged. The name Daniel Harper had once been a quiet hope of the family, a grandson of Charles, the son of his late eldest brother, raised under my husband's quiet guidance. Though Daniel lived far from home, he never severed ties. He pursued journalism, built a name for himself investigating corporate fraud and financial corruption, and even won awards for uncovering real estate scandals in New York. When Charles passed, Daniel was in Berlin. He didn't come to the funeral. Not because he didn't care, but because he knew there would be no place left for sincerity. One gray Wednesday afternoon, the doorbell rang. I opened it, and there he stood. Daniel, soaked from the rain, coat heavy, suitcase in tow. His eyes held a look I hadn't seen in anyone else's since Charles was gone, an unspoken trust that didn't need to be earned. "I didn't come for the funeral," he said. "I came to find out what really happened." From that moment, Daniel did what he did best. He investigated. I handed him everything we had, the handwritten draft, the documents Victor and Lydia had compiled, Ava's testimony, and most importantly, the official version of the will that Vivian had used to claim control of Charles's $78 million estate. Daniel worked in silence. He didn't waste time speculating who was right or wrong. He followed facts like a steady current. He called every notary listed in the documents. He checked each stamp, every signature, every date. Then one day, he turned to me, eyes calm but voice low. "Aunt Marianne, I found a smudge on the ink seal." I looked at him. "A smudge?" One of the red seals on the notarized pages bleeds through the paper like it was stamped after the document was printed. No real notary would do that. "You mean?" He nodded. "It's either a forged notary seal or the document was altered after it was signed." Daniel dug deeper, tracing asset records through the city's registration offices. What he found made even Lydia raise an eyebrow. "A classic trick," she said, "but executed with disturbing precision." In the final 3 weeks before Charles passed, a series of assets, land, stock shares, properties had been quietly transferred from Harper Capital into a private trust solely under Vivian's name. No power of attorney, no medical clearance. And the date on those papers? A Sunday the very same day Ava had said she was asked to forge a signature. That evening, Daniel and I sat on the old living room sofa, sipping chamomile tea. The same tea I always made when Charles came home late. Rain tapped gently on the windows. The room was quiet, soft with lamplight. He turned to me and asked, "Aunt Marianne, I have to know this because I think they're about to retaliate." I didn't speak. I waited. He looked into my eyes. "Whose side are you on?" I asked. "I'm on the side of the truth. Even if that means going against your family?" He nodded slowly. "And your own mother, Vivian?" He looked away for a moment, then back. "Especially if it's her. If she really did what these documents suggest." then no one deserves to reclaim this legacy more than you. I didn't cry, but something inside me softened like the first crack in a long, cold winter, letting in a sliver of spring. Soon after, Daniel sent a file to the Harper Foundation, where Vivian was still acting as interim director during legal review. It was titled, Internal Investigation Request, Allegations of Unauthorized Transfers and Asset Manipulation. Inside were detailed charts showing date discrepancies, mismatched signatures, internal emails, and a report pulled from Harper Capital's secure system. At the bottom of one internal memo, a note read, "Handled per V's instruction." No full name, but everyone knew who V was. Truth doesn't need to shout to survive. It only needs someone brave enough to lift the lid and someone else willing to read what lies beneath. Daniel is part of a generation that refuses silence. He's not here to defend anyone blindly. He's here to return a place to someone who should never have been erased. As I looked down at the final document Daniel laid before me, I read the bold heading, Request to Reinstate Legal Beneficiary Status, based on handwritten will, witness accounts, and supplemental investigative findings. If you've ever sat in a room full of people who knew you but still felt invisible, if your name was never called, your seat never saved, your worth never spoken aloud, this is for you. The truth does not stay buried forever. Sometimes it just needs one person like Daniel to walk in and say, "I'm here for the truth." The Crystal Hall at the Whitmore Hotel had been reserved for an entire Sunday morning under the grand title of the Harper Family Legacy Expansion Summit. The internal invitation was dressed up in lofty phrasing, honoring tradition, building a prosperous future. But beneath the chandeliers and stage lighting, everyone knew what this gathering was really about. On stage, Vivian Harper stood in a sleek black silk dress, hair pulled back tight, her gaze calm and certain, like someone who already had the $78 million sewn into her seams. She was preparing to unveil her latest brainchild, Harper Horizon, a grand investment venture promising luxury offices, resorts, and residences across 3 western states. The media team was ready. The spotlight was fixed. Every seat in the hall buzzed with anticipation. Everyone except me. I sat near the very back, tucked behind a pillar and under the weight of an old gray coat. In my lap rested a worn leather bag. Inside it wasn't power, or a prepared speech, or money. It was the truth, and the truth doesn't need a microphone to be heard. At precisely 10:04 a.m., Vivian stepped to the podium, her signature half-smile ready to charm. But before she could finish her first sentence, something subtle but seismic shifted the entire room. Legal clerks, calm and methodical, moved down the aisles, handing out sealed black folders to every family member, board supervisor, and major stakeholder. Confidential, internal review, requested by beneficiary, the covers read. Some opened them right away, others held them in cautious hands, brows furrowed, but words weren't necessary. Within seconds, the room fell into a tense, unfamiliar silence, not of boredom, but of realization. Something important was unfolding, and it couldn't be ignored. Vivian kept talking buzzwords about legacy, sustainability, and future generations, but no one was listening anymore. They were reading. The first page was Charles Harper's handwritten note. Most in the room had seen his handwriting before, unmistakable, personal, looping slightly at the ends. For M, the one who weathered every storm with me. If I don't manage to revise this in time, know that I never intended to leave you behind. The next page was Ava's sworn testimony, notarized and verified, detailing how Vivian had instructed her to forge Charles's signature on a Sunday. He wasn't even in the office that day, Ava had written. The third page was Daniel's independent investigation, a careful collection of asset transfers, notary discrepancies, and internal financial documents revealing over $21 million rerouted under Vivian's directive. The note beneath one email simply read, "Handled per V's instructions." It didn't need a full name. Everyone knew who V was. Vivian paused, her words faltering as she scanned the room. She was looking for something to latch onto, someone to rescue her. But no one met her gaze. Eyes were no longer fixed on the stage, they were fixed on the pages in front of them. The head of legal counsel, Alan James, looked up, removed his glasses, and directed his words toward me. "Did you request the review of the will, Mrs. Harper?" I didn't stand. I didn't raise my voice. I just nodded, steady and composed, my eyes meeting his without bitterness or pride. Only quiet certainty. I simply made sure no one could erase me. One of the investment advisors raised a hand. "I propose we suspend all expansion plans until the legal basis of the inheritance is clarified." A major shareholder added, "I'm withholding any further funding until we know the founding assets were lawfully transferred." Then Florence, Charles's niece, stood, her voice clear and firm. "I trusted you, Vivian," she said. "Now I need to start over." Vivian stepped off the stage like a crack forming in polished marble. Whispers grew louder, cameras clicked, and the tide of scrutiny rose around her. She turned toward Daniel, who stood silently near the middle row. Her voice cracked. "Daniel, do you believe me?" He didn't answer. She tried again. "I was only trying to protect." But he cut in, his voice firm and unshaking. "You tried to erase her, Mom, and you made it look legal." When the meeting adjourned, I rose from my seat and walked slowly to the door. No one stopped me. No one could anymore. An elderly man, Charles's former business partner, approached, his eyes heavy with remorse. "I'm sorry I stayed silent for so long," he said quietly. I took his hand with no blame, no need for words. In my heart, I carried just one line. I don't need anyone to pay. I just need to be remembered, because I was there, and no one has the right to erase me. If you've ever been cut out not for what you did, but for what you didn't fight for, if you've ever been pushed out of the very home you helped build, know this: you don't need to shout, you just need to stand firm. The truth will do the rest. 3 weeks after the Harper Foundation meeting, an internal bulletin was circulated to all family members, board executives, shareholders, and strategic partners. It read, "Effective immediately, Mrs. Vivian Harper is temporarily suspended from all financial executive roles within the Harper Family Trust and its associated companies, pending results of an independent legal review." The next line was even quieter, but heavier with meaning. "Mrs. Marianne Harper's name has been fully restored in all legal documentation, inheritance filings, and founder records, according to the original handwritten testament of Mr. Charles Harper, verified through forensic authentication." There was no courtroom showdown, no drawn-out litigation, no sensational headlines. But for me, it was a victory not because I reclaimed a house, a percentage, or a place in a will, but because I had not lost myself in the process of reclaiming what was right. That morning, I sat alone in Charles's old office, a room that had been locked since the day of the funeral. Amber light poured through the stained glass window. I opened the desk drawer, the one where he used to keep his old pocket watch, a gift from his father. Next to it was a folded slip of paper, aged and yellowed. I had once thought it was lost, but there it was, his handwriting, unmistakable. "M. If you're reading this, then I suppose I'm no longer beside you in the way I used to be, but I never left. You know me, I wouldn't let anyone erase you from anything I've ever touched. You are the best part of my life. C." I folded the note gently, as if folding away a memory, and placed it back into the drawer. The door creaked open behind me. Daniel stepped in, wearing a crisp white shirt, his face still youthful, but now holding something steadier, shaped by what we had both endured. "They finalized the transfer today," he said softly. I smiled, my gaze not on the paperwork, but on Charles's old leather chair. "He'd be proud," Daniel added, gently squeezing my hand. I shook my head, not with sadness or defiance, but with the calm of someone who had made peace with the truth. "I didn't do this for his pride, Daniel," I replied. "I don't want anyone punished. I don't need Vivian shamed, or headlines printed, or anyone disgraced." I paused for a moment, then added quietly, almost as if reminding myself, "I just wanted them to remember I was there, and I never disappeared." Vivian was never taken to court. She was never indicted. There was no criminal sentence. But in a world where reputation is currency, the silent retreat of those who once admired her became a lifelong sentence of its own. She began to withdraw from meetings, declined investment proposals, and little by little, like a fading watermark, disappeared from the day-to-day operations of the Harper Foundation. Even at the Winter Gala, once her stage under every spotlight, her name was missing from this year's invitation list. I didn't return to take back power or bathe in glory. Instead, I revived the scholarship fund Charles and I had once dreamed of, the Charles M. Foundation, an idea from our early years together that had long been buried beneath corporate obligations. Now, it provides aid to law and finance students, particularly those from underrepresented communities, students who don't have anyone pulling strings behind the curtain for them. I don't stand at the podium. I sit in the back, sipping tea instead of wine, and talk quietly with young people about how to keep your name whole when walking through worlds where others have more say than you. At the first graduation the foundation supported, a student asked me, if you could change one thing in your past, what would it be? I smiled and answered without hesitation. Nothing. Because if I hadn't been erased, I would never have understood the worth of writing my name back in on the very page they tried to skip. And if you've made it this far into the story, maybe you've felt like Marianne too. Maybe you've been pushed to the edge of your own family. Maybe someone made you feel invisible. Maybe you stayed silent so long that you forgot the sound of your own voice. If so, please remember this. Honor doesn't have to be shouted to be real. Truth doesn't need fireworks to shine. And you are not invisible. You are just preparing to reappear on your own terms, in your own time. The old house on Willow Lane still stood, quiet and patient, as if time had only circled it but never truly left. After all the months tangled in legal files, whispered loyalties, and buried truths, I decided to return, not to reclaim anything, but to begin again with the one thing I had never truly lost: myself. I opened the weathered oak door, its hinges creaking with a sound so familiar it felt like memory exhaling. On the walls were the faint outlines where picture frames once hung. The soft white curtains by the window swayed slightly in the early autumn breeze. I stepped into the living room, letting my fingers brush the old mahogany tea table Charles built by hand when we first married. I turned on the vintage record player and chose the same vinyl he used to play every quiet Sunday morning, a wordless jazz tune only we ever understood. The music rose, warm and round, like breath at dawn. The next day, I rolled up my sleeves and walked into the garden where Charles once grew roses. Every Sunday, he'd pick a single bloom and place it by my tea. No note, no grand gesture, just a quiet offering more tender than any "I love you." The garden had grown wild, the soil was dry, the path covered in weeds. But I didn't hire anyone, I did it myself. I trimmed every thorny branch, stirred compost like I once taught him to do, and pressed my hands into the dirt as if speaking through my fingers. I'm still here, and I'm still me, even if the world once forgot this name. One still afternoon, I opened the old storage chest and found the yellowed photographs, handwritten letters from Charles when we were young and apart, pages from journals I kept only for myself, reminders that every day mattered, even the ones no one saw. I read my younger handwriting, the clumsy notes about salty soup, about Charles forgetting our anniversary, and how he made it up with a silent hug that never let go. There's no one left to tell these stories to, but I don't need anyone to believe they happened. I lived them. One morning, I poured coffee into the old green ceramic mug, the same kind Charles once broke, then quietly replaced with a full new set. I sat on the front porch, sunlight spilling across the new rosebuds, and opened my laptop. I didn't write a novel, not a lawsuit, just a memoir for no publisher, for no audience, but for one purpose: to remind myself that even the pages torn out can still be rewritten if the pen is in your own hand. I don't need to win against anyone, I wrote. I don't need them to feel sorry. I don't need an apology. I just need to be certain that, in the end, I wasn't erased. I was the one who wrote the final chapter with my own hand. That weekend, Daniel came by. He brought a white rose bush, the same kind Charles once favored. You said you needed one more for the garden, he smiled. Then after a pause, but you weren't just restoring the garden, were you? You were restoring yourself. I didn't answer. I just smiled. Then I took the bush outside and planted it beside the old root. That evening, I played the old record again. I sat in the room we once called home, now warm with lamplight and the scent of earth and tea. The wedding photo of Charles and me hung freshly reframed, not to mourn the past, but to remind me, real love never dies. It only changes form from hand to memory, from touch to legacy. And dignity, once buried, can bloom again if we have the courage to no longer stay silent. If you've made it this far, perhaps you've been where I've been, pushed to the margins of a story you helped write, overlooked in a house you once built with love, or quietly erased from the lives of those who once spoke your name with affection. Maybe you've sat through family dinners where your presence was barely acknowledged, or watched others rewrite the narrative as if you had never been there at all. But I hope you remember this. Your worth was never tied to who applauded you or who remembered to include your name. Sometimes, the quietest voices carry the deepest truths, and sometimes, surviving with grace is its own kind of justice. If this story made you feel seen, if you recognized even a small part of yourself in Marianne's journey, I invite you to leave a comment that simply says, "I'm still here," not as a protest, but as a soft affirmation that you were never truly gone. If it brought you peace, clarity, or just the comfort of knowing someone understands, I hope you'll click like so that this story finds its way to someone else who might need it too. And if you wish to walk with us through the next chapters of memory, dignity, and healing, I warmly invite you to subscribe. And finally, if you know someone, a mother, a grandmother, or maybe even yourself, who once sat silently while others made the decisions, who loved deeply but was never acknowledged for it, who gave more than they were ever given back, then please share this story. Because those who were once forgotten still deserve to be called by their true names, to sit in their rightful place, and to have their story told not with noise, but with truth. This is Grandma's final chapter, where the end of the story is not a silence, but a beginning, a return, a quiet reclaiming of one's name, one's voice, and one's place in the life they helped build.